you know why gasoline won out?
Money.
Ultimately it became money. But back in the day, we were pulling oil out of the ground, and we were using it to oil all the gears of machinery and whatnot. And
well, I mean, they were using whale oil for oiling gears in street lights.
So there was a byproduct of this oil that was coming out of the ground. You know what it was?
No.
It was this liquid called gasoline, and nobody knew what the hell to do with the stuff. It was worthless. But you got it with the crude oil that you wanted to use for other things.
See, I always thought a refinery took crude oil and made it into gasoline. I didn't realize gasoline was one of the compounds coming out of the ground with crude oil.
That's exactly what it was. It was a byproduct. When people discovered that you could make an engine and you could run it on this crude stuff called gasoline because you could ignite it and it would burn. There was a guy named John D. Rockefeller who was heavily into the oil industry at the time. And he did two things. He put a lot of support into the development of gasoline-powered engines. But even more than that is he built service stations. So, I mean, as America was developing and cars were developing, you could only go a certain distance. If you had an electric vehicle, you could only go a certain distance before the batteries ran out. And if you had a steam engine, well, you'd have to stop and find water so you could fill up the boiler again and get that hot and start going again. Gasoline had some real advantages compared to the other types of fuel, but it still had the same disadvantages. You drove 50 miles or 100 miles and you ran out of gas. Where the hell are you going to get more gas? So John D. Rockefeller built the first service stations, gas stations, along various routes going out of major cities so that when you were running low, you could stop and fill up. So he made tons of money by selling a waste product that nobody else wanted called gasoline to run on engines. And that really was the thing that pushed gasoline-powered engines to the forefront of development.
So, John, Rockefeller puts these service stations on main roads going out of major metros so that people could fill up. Before Rockefeller service stations, where were people getting fuel? Just a local service station, or was it like some kind of craft business where people would go and get some gasoline?
It would have to have been something very local. And just realize back then that we were very early in the development of, one-cylinder engines and whatnot. And so you didn't have gasoline available very many places. It just wasn't that available initially. And the fact is, an electric vehicle was more expensive than the gasoline engines of an equivalent time. But women, 100 to 1, gravitated to electric vehicles, because they weren't dirty and sooty like the gasoline engines were. And the biggest issue was you didn't have to crank it. And having to crank a gasoline engine really was the death knell for most women being able to drive. A woman could get behind the wheel of an EV and click, you were off. But the electric vehicles were typically more expensive than their gasoline counterparts. And it wasn't until Kettering came along with the electric starter that we were able to really put women behind the wheel. And that Kettering and Kettering Institute, Kettering Lab, that was all what became part of what was part of GM. And Kettering was the guy who invented the electric starter.
Well, I mean, I don't know if that was a plus or a minus. I think then they wanted to vote. I mean, they were starting to feel some freedom, so I don't know.
This has been Jeff Stearns, Connected Through Cars.